Room 2B was reset precisely at 9:06 a.m. Outside, the winter wind slipped through the window cracks, cold and indifferent, just like the atmosphere inside Winnebago. No greetings, no smiles. Here religion had been weaponized for performance, and humanity was folded into brief administrative sentences. Judge Corliss Denham sat behind the raised bench, towering like an ancient symbol of power carved into stone. Her eyes were ice, her lips sealed tight. The pen in her hand tapped rhythmically like a countdown ticking off the lives below. Each sentence she spoke was a warning, "Don't waste my time." Clarwin, a woman of color around 40, held her case file tightly against her chest. This was the outcome of her next hearing's second-degree property theft. A small offense. But the way everyone's eyes slid over her as if she were a failed clearance sale item made the air in the room feel freezing. When her name was called, someone else stood up. Not a lawyer, not a reporter, but a sharply dressed man in his mid-30s, calm expression, dark grey coat, black shoes, without a speck of dust. No badge, no briefcase, only an old leather notebook in hand. He walked forward quietly, but with certainty, as though he'd witnessed many grand institutions, but belonged to none. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said in a deep, clear, calm voice. "I'm Thomas. I'm here today to assist in the procedural review of Clarissa Wynn's hearing." "I've reviewed the 'Who are you?'" Judge Denham cut him off. Her tone was so sharp it seemed to reset the courtroom clock. Thomas held her gaze, didn't flinch. "I'm not legal representation. I'm only assisting in ensuring the defendant understands her rights. Do you have a license to practice law in this state? No, Your Honor." "But I don't, then I don't care." She crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, her voice rising just enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "I have a full courtroom of qualified attorneys. I don't have time for anybody wasting the court's resources." The words landed like a punch wrapped in legal decorum. Someone held their breath. The bailiff looked around, hesitant. The clerk stopped typing. An older woman in the back row slowly lowered her phone. "Nobody." That word hung in the air, echoing, even as Judge Denham moved on to the following file. Thomas stood still. No arguments, no blinking. He nodded, stepped back, and returned to sit in the last row. He showed no anger, no signs of being hurt. He opened his leather notebook, wrote a few short lines, and sat silently, as if he'd never been there at all. But it was this very absence of reaction that made the entire room feel suddenly uneasy. Clarissa's hearing lasted just 3 minutes. No health check, no chance to explain. The charges remained. Nothing changed. And when the next name on the docket was called, Thomas was already gone. No one saw him rise. No one heard his footsteps. But the way he left without a single word was what stayed with people. Something they couldn't forget. At the attorney's table, a young public defender leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "She just picked the wrong guy to dismiss." The colleague didn't respond, but their eyes alert now said enough. No one in the room knew who Thomas was. Why had he shown up? Or what had happened when Judge Denham uttered the word, "Nobody"? They couldn't know. That moment she said it, she triggered a silent reckoning. Once the system is unable to ignore it, no one called his name, but he would be the last one to call theirs. Thomas left courtroom 2B as if he had never been there. No eye contact, no announcement, no trace. But in the worn leather notebook he carried, the first lines of a report had already begun. In the elevator descending alone, the fluorescent light flickered above. The doors opened into the underground parking garage. No one entered. He didn't glance at the mirror. Didn't need to. The man Judge Denham had just dismissed as nobody was the person who had signed the formal internal investigation request against her 4 weeks ago. His full name is Thomas Avery, and he is 35 years old. Senior Investigator Office of the Illinois Judicial Inspector General. His job to observe, document, and expose judicial misconduct, especially when hidden behind tradition. He didn't appear in headlines. He never spoke to the press. There were no circulating photos of him. But those within the system, those who truly understood how justice could bend, they knew the name. And they knew if Thomas Avery showed up at your courthouse, it meant someone had already raised the alarm. Courtroom 2B wasn't on his radar by accident. In the past 2 years, at least 6 anonymous reports had flagged Judge Corliss Denham's behavior. No breaking scandals, no audio clips, no shocking videos, just repeating patterns described with precision cuts people off mid-sentence. Shows consistent attitude towards self-represented defendants. Tone is noticeably harsher with non-white individuals. Public defenders aren't allowed to finish arguments. Individually nothing, collectively smoke. Thomas always knew that where there was smoke, something was burning. He didn't send anyone else. He didn't announce his visit. He drove quietly from Springfield to Rockford, signed in under an alias. No entourage, no badge. Thomas didn't crave attention. He preferred listening. He liked watching those in power speak when they believed no one was recording. And Judge Denham had helped him more than she would ever know that morning. Her words, "We don't have time for nobodies," they weren't just offensive. They were evidence, captured by the courthouse's internal surveillance, logged by a legal systems specialist, and most importantly, they confirmed every suspicion he had on the very first visit. Before the engine started, Thomas had already begun writing in the car. Eliminated procedural support without verifying role, publicly used the word none to label, concluded without identity check. Overall atmosphere in courtroom. This wasn't the first time. He didn't need to speak, didn't need to unlock anything. He just wrote, and each line he penned could mark the end of a career. That afternoon, in a modest hotel room in downtown Rockford, Thomas opened his laptop and connected to the secure data system. He sent 2 messages, one to Bryn Ashford, senior data analyst at the Inspector General's office. 2, one to the Judicial Oversight Committee to formally request an investigation. Pull all records from Courtroom 2B from the past 7 years, he texted Bryn. Filter by race, gender, and interruption duration during testimony. Compare how Judge Denham handles defendants without attorneys. Bryn replied 3 minutes later, running the system. Preliminary data incoming. What are you hoping to find? Thomas looked down at the page. The last sentence he had just written read, "She doesn't know what she said," or in front of whom, he typed back, "I don't care what she meant. I care what she said and how many heard it." Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Judge Denham was preparing her hearing schedule for the next day. She didn't remember Thomas' face, didn't recall his name. She also didn't know that the man she had just dismissed from her courtroom was the one who would decide whether she still belonged in one. That afternoon, the Winnebago District Courthouse was nearly empty. The final hearing had concluded. Footsteps echoed across the wide floors and down the corridor like a crypt. A few staff remained behind. No one wanted to linger too long, especially not on Judge Denham's floor. Inside her chambers, light from the 2 tall windows stretched across the surface of an old wooden desk. Judge Denham was standing gripping a file tightly, her lips pursed to the point of whiteness. 3 public defenders tomorrow, and another unfamiliar name, she muttered with a sneer in her voice. Probably another one of those TikTok lawyer kids. Can't read a statute but great at making noise. In the corner, Velena Morse, the newly appointed assistant in her early 30s, stood silent like a statue by the file cabinet. Her hands were still, her eyes fixed forward. No eye contact, but inside her head everything was moving. Velena had started working under Judge Denham in May. She was a top law school graduate with near-perfect marks. Like many new entrants into the system, she once believed, as long as I do the right thing, justice will work as it should. But then she heard things every day from within this room. Every sarcastic remark, every judging glance toward poor black defendants, every raised eyebrow when a public defender walked in. They all chipped away at what she had left in her. That afternoon, when Judge Denham turned away and resumed her notes, Velena gathered her courage to ask Mom, "The man from this morning, the one assisting Ms. Wynne, do we know who he is?" Judge Denham didn't turn. Her voice came cold and clipped. "Some amateur playing lawyer. Knows just enough legal terms from the internet to think he's qualified to argue in a courtroom." Velena hesitated. Actually, he didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even express an attitude. This time, Judge Denham paused. Turned. Her eyes were sharp and frigid. "You think I was too harsh?" She asked, every word honed like polished steel. Velena didn't answer immediately. She looked down then at the shelves and finally into the judge's eyes. "I just think calling someone nobody in front of a courtroom might have been unnecessary." The air froze. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then Judge Denham laughed a short, dry, full laugh. "You're still young Morse, and you still believe courtrooms are places to showcase kindness and emotion. But this is a battlefield. Lose control, lose authority, lose your power. And a judge without power is nothing but a puppet in robes." Velena said nothing. No agreement, no protest. She nodded, gathered the files. And as she left the office, the door clicked softly behind her, but didn't close all the way. Out in the hallway, Court Security Officer Jeremy Haskins was sipping coffee from a paper cup, leaning against the wall. He spotted Velena and nodded lightly. No words. "You've started, haven't you?" Velena paused, turned. "What do you mean?" Jeremy exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the judge's office door. Then he spoke quiet and steady. "She doesn't yell, doesn't slam her desk, doesn't threaten, but she always knows how to pick the right person to make them feel smaller than the floor." Velena asked quietly, "No one's ever filed a complaint." Jeremy started slowly. "Some did, a few tried, no one got far. She's smart, never uses explicitly offensive words, never admits anything. Adjusts her tone, phrasing, and gaze just enough for the vulnerable to feel it, but not enough to put into a report." Velena didn't respond, but her eyes had changed. When she returned to her desk, she first didn't check the schedule, but opened her laptop and typed 2 words into the search bar: Thomas Avery. The results appeared. Internal judicial investigator appointed 4 months ago, specializing in identifying ethical violations in the legal system. Former federal prosecutor expert in judicial process audits. No family, no public record, just a nickname in the legal field. The Silent Watcher. Velena leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Across town, Thomas sat in a small hotel apartment. His laptop was open. On the screen, data dashboards from Brin's analysis glowed. One line stood out at the top of the report: Judge Denham interrupted unrepresented defendants on average after 9.2 seconds. Interruption rate for white individuals 18%, for people of color 62%. Thomas said nothing, just stared. Then typed into the internal messaging system: "We're not investigating a person. We're peeling back a system that can smile without raising its voice." and how to suppress without leaving fingerprints. The storm hadn't come yet, but no one could stop what had already begun. The next morning, 8:00 a.m., in the dim light of the hotel room, sunlight filtered faintly through faded curtains. Thomas had been up for hours. He didn't eat breakfast. He didn't turn on the TV, just sat at his laptop, listening as if a trial were happening right before him, except no one knew he was watching. On screen was an internal courtroom recording from 6 months ago. Same judge, same courtroom, same authority. The defendant was an exhausted and disheveled single mother, trying to explain why she had missed housing paperwork. "I just lost my job. My kids had a fever all week and—" "That's enough," Judge Denham cut in, her tone dry and cold. "You're not the first person in the world to struggle. This courtroom isn't your diary." Thomas paused the video. He wrote a short line into the report. Dismissive tone when hardship is reported, no acknowledgement of effort to explain. A small entry. But he knew lines like these repeated often enough would form a report that couldn't be disputed. Meanwhile, data analyst Bryn Ashford sat surrounded by a sea of information in Springfield. Her screen displayed over 80 hearings, color-coded by indicators, speech interruptions, vocal fairness levels, percentage of defendants of color denied legal representation. She entered a line into the internal system, 17 instances of interruption in under 10 seconds. 14 of those were people of color. Thomas didn't reply immediately, but minutes later he sent a single sentence. She didn't explicitly discriminate by race. She discriminated by everything, from shoes to accents to where someone sat. And the system wrote it off as judicial personality. And then something unexpected happened. Velena from Judge Denham's chambers submitted an anonymous report. No names, no direct accusations. Just one line. "I don't know if it's a violation, but I know something's wrong." Bryn flagged the inbox. She forwarded it to Tommy. "Velena Morse, personal assistant, just submitted a vague report. Not much, but enough to confirm the inside is trembling." Thomas typed back only 2 words. "She's watching." That same day, a small blog called Justice Underground, run by a former local advocate, published a short post accompanied by a blurry image from the recent hearing. Judge calls a black advisor, nobody in open court. Who was he? No drama. No opinion, just the facts and a single question. 3 hours later, the post was reshared by a civil rights organization in Peoria. They added only one sentence. "It's 2025 and black men are still being called nobody in courtrooms." The story began to spread. 4:30 p.m., a local radio station aired an audio clip. "We don't have time for nobodies wasting this court's resources. No context needed, no explanation required." One sentence lifted from the courtroom footage, replayed across channels during rush hour. 5:00 p.m. Outside the courthouse, 5 people appeared with simple signs. "Respect doesn't come from power, but from how you use it." Then 10 people, then 20. Someone played the audio clip on a Bluetooth speaker. Passers-by stopped. A middle-aged man, who had once tried to represent himself in one of Judge Denham's hearings, stood on a wooden crate and said, "I couldn't even finish one sentence." No one believed me. But today, hearing how she spoke to that man, I know I wasn't crazy. I was treated like I didn't exist. And today, I'm not staying silent. Thomas watched it all unfold through a live stream on his phone. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He wrote in his notebook, "No need for firebrands." Friday, 6:45 a.m. The sky had yet to brighten fully. The air was thick, like before a storm. In her office, Judge Corliss Denham sat still. Her eyes are unfocused, staring at a frozen image captured from a video. The picture was blurry, but she recognized herself instantly, mouth open, eyes narrowed, caught mid-sentence. Beneath the headline, the man called Nobody was a senior state investigator. Judge Denham picked up her phone, dialed someone, then set it down again. A moment later it buzzed. Caller Judge Orrin Bexley, colleague former law professor, senior member of the Internal Review Board. His message was brief. "You've made the papers. Call me." She didn't call. She knew that if she had to explain, her power was already trembling. 8:03 a.m. Across the city, in a modest hotel apartment, Thomas hit send. A secure file was uploaded to the oversight system containing a 21-page preliminary report. 3 video clips highlighting signs of bias during court proceedings. A formal request to unlock all courtroom 2B recordings and judicial files from the past 7 years. 8:54 a.m. A notification pinged in the system. The investigation file was officially opened. Thomas didn't smile. He turned the page in his notebook and wrote, "The first answer is always self-preservation. Wait for the third reaction when the truth shows its face." 9:16 a.m. At the Winnebago courthouse, Velena entered the office and set her briefcase down. The judge had closed the blinds. No lights, no music, no response, just the heavy stillness of hierarchy. Velena didn't speak first. Judge Denham turned around, eyes lacking their usual sharpness. "Check who shared that audio clip," she said. Velena hesitated. "Ma'am, it was pulled from internal video, one of the system's duplicates. Source is hard to trace." Hard Denham's voice tightened. "This is spreading like a virus and no one knows who posted it first." Velena swallowed. "It's spreading organically. No leader, no spokesperson." In the break room down the hall, 2 public defenders, one white, one Latino, were sipping coffee. Their voices were low, but Velena heard them as she passed. "I heard that guy wasn't an outsider." "Yeah. Internal affairs investigator." Well, she picked the wrong guy to mess with. By the afternoon, a shorter audio clip was broadcast again. "We don't have time for nobodies." This time, no pushback. And outside the courthouse, over 30 people stood in the cold, holding signs calmly without shouting, playing old recordings from previous hearings. A former law student, once dismissed as ignorant of the law, stood on a crate and said, "I used to think being cut off was my fault. Now I know she spoke to all of us that way. And today I speak so that no one else has to stay silent like I did." On the second floor, a closed-door meeting began urgently and unannounced. Thomas wasn't present, but his name was on every internal email being circulated. And at exactly 3:17 p.m., Judge Denham received a second phone call. The voice on the other end was clear. "Judge Corliss Denham, we're informing you, the Office of Judicial Oversight has launched a formal review into your courtroom conduct over the past 7 days. Effective immediately, you must recuse yourself from all cases during the investigation." Click. No pleasantries, no remarks. Velena stood from her desk, quietly packed up the files. No one asked where she was going. No one stopped her. The office door opened, then closed softly, leaving a small gap. "Thomas." He wrote one more line on a fresh page. "She still thinks this is a public battle. But justice doesn't need wealth. Only enough data. And the right moment." Monday. A blindingly bright morning, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Rockford woke up slower than usual, and inside the Winnebago courthouse, people moved cautiously. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew today wasn't like other days. It wasn't about the number of cases or the severity of the charges. It was because he had returned. Courtroom 2B was cramped but not noisy. No gavel bangs, no soft chuckles. The silence wasn't tense, but one deep breath could tip the balance. Three strangers sat in the second row. No cameras, no folders, just a small tag pinned to each coat, Judicial Oversight Committee Observer. The man in the center sat with a straight back, dark sweater, and calm eyes, Thomas. No more shadows, no more unknown. By simply being there, he changed the room. No one asked who he was anymore. By now, everyone knew. A side window was left slightly ajar. Judge Denham entered, her black robe swept behind her as always. But for a split second, she hesitated. Her eyes scanned the courtroom and landed exactly where Thomas sat. No one else noticed, but she knew. And in that moment, for the first time, she walked slower. She sat on the bench, the place that once felt untouchable. But today, the waistline of power doesn't rest the same. It felt colder, emptier, and no longer a throne. The first case proceeded, a minor matter, a simple procedure, just a small exchange. Judge Denham listened and didn't interrupt. No scowl, no show of dominance, just nodded and said, "Thank you, proceed." The entire room shifted. A lawyer glanced at his colleague. Did she say thank you? No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. Something wasn't right. The second case went by in silence. No interruptions, no clipped tone, no missing context. She even said, "Let me clarify. Let's review this detail together." Since when was Judge Denham polite? The courtroom began to stir. But then the mask cracked in the third case. A young black man, 23 years old, named Terrell Gaines, was brought in. He was direct, breathing unevenly, eyes down. His attorney requested a postponement because prior documentation hadn't yet been submitted. A valid request, a common reason, a standard legal move. But Judge Denham's eyes shifted, brows lowered, her hand resumed tapping the desk. Then she said softly, but like a blade through air, "This is the second delay request. This is a courtroom, not a daycare." The entire room froze. No one breathed. In the second row, Thomas remained seated upright still. No reaction. No note. He only tilted his head slightly, just enough for the side window light to fall across his face. And he looked directly into Judge Denham's eyes. No anger, no scorn, just awareness. And in that glance, he sent a message. "I've seen it. You don't get to hide anymore." Trying to stay composed, the defense attorney spoke. "Your Honor, the delay is due to the prosecution. My client is not at fault." Judge Denham paused. Her tone lowered, but lacked the certainty it once carried. "Very well. Noted. Proceed." The case concluded. No one said a word, but everyone understood something had shifted. The judge no longer held sole power in the room. The three observers from the Oversight Committee stood. Thomas said nothing, nodded to no one. He walked out quietly and precisely, as if every step had already been planned. Judge Denham didn't look back. Not out of fear, but because for the first time she knew she was no longer above. Less than 3 hours later, she was called to the second floor to a private room with a long table. 2 people were seated, representatives from the Oversight Committee and an ethics attorney. Thomas sat at the far end. No overcoat, no laptop, just Thomas. He began with the same steady voice, deep and neutral. "Judge Denham, do you recall calling someone nobody during last week's third hearing?" Denham inhaled sharply. "I remember someone trying to disrupt proceedings without proper standing. I handled it as I saw fit." Thomas nodded. "And did you verify my identity before making that statement in front of over 10 people, all of whom work in the legal field?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm not required to verify those without legal credentials." Thomas didn't push back. He didn't need to. He placed a folder on the table and said calmly, You weren't required to verify, but you labeled someone with a word that shook the entire system. He continued, measured and composed. We've reviewed the last 42 hearings. The data reveals a clear pattern of bias. Interruptions come faster with defendants of color. Tone is sharper with those without counsel. Language skews dismissive without legal cause. Denham clenched her hands beneath the table, but her eyes for the first time lost their direction. Thomas looked up, concluding the chapter, "Power can be maintained through control." But justice doesn't come from control. It comes from fairness. And fairness always begins with the words we choose to describe a person. Denham didn't respond. And in that quiet room, no one needed to raise their voice, because what needed to be heard had already been said. Thursday, 5:30 p.m. The first spring winds still carried a chill. Outside the Winnebago courthouse, old snow from the past storm hadn't fully melted, lying still on the stone steps like dust that hadn't yet been brushed away. Inside Judge Denham's chambers, the room remained neat with old bookshelves. A framed photo of her with the Judicial Council stared down silently from the wall, wearing an unnamed expression of unease. At 5:12 p.m., an email arrived from the Office of Judicial Oversight. No dramatic subject line, no accusatory wording, just a plain administrative notification with the weight of a gavel. Judge Corliss Denham will be temporarily suspended to facilitate an investigation into her courtroom conduct and language used in hearings from 2018 to present. During this time, all staff within the office may request reassignment if they no longer feel the environment supports impartial professional standards. There was no press conference, no internal announcement, just one email, one line, and the entire structure shifted. Judge Denham read the message without blinking. Not too long, no outburst. She lifted her glass of water, drank slowly as if bracing for a small private war, and sat still, eyes locked on the screen, as though waiting for the power she once owned to explain itself. But it didn't. No one called, no one texted, no one defended her, and she no longer had the final word for the first time in over 20 years on the bench. Elsewhere in the building, Velena quietly shut down her laptop. A transfer request was made on her desk, asking her to move to the Court of Appeals in St. Louis. No long justification, no tears, just a small handwritten note left behind on the desk, not addressed to anyone in particular, not because I'm against it, but because I can't add to it anymore. She packed her bag and glanced out the window one last time. Below, a group of law students scribbled down field notes. One held up a sign with words that had become familiar: "Respect is not worn." It's shown. Velena left. No escort, but every step she took, quiet and steady, felt like she had just stepped out of the shadow people once called power. Across town, in a small coffee shop, Thomas sat alone in the corner. In front of him was an untouched espresso and a folded piece of paper, the only thing he kept from this case. The handwriting tilted slightly with just one line: "Thank you for making someone listen." He folded the paper and slipped it into his notebook. No feeling of victory, no grand declaration. Only one certainty: one less person now had the power to silence others. That day, local radio broadcasts were shortened to just one headline: Judge Denham was officially suspended. Disciplinary hearing expected within 6 weeks. No further comments from authorities. Judge Denham has issued no public statement. People only remembered fragments: her slow steps, her quiet exit. No escort, no spinning lights. Just a woman in a long coat strolling through a melting winter, and for the first time no longer called judge. Was Thomas asked for a comment? He declined. No interviews, no articles. He submitted one final internal report ending with a single line. Case concluded. Requesting reassignment to monitor Monroe East Courthouse, 5 anonymous filings in the past 2 months. Continue observation, no signature, no symbol, just one man quietly recording how power had been used. And walking away. March. The final winds of winter had begun to soften. On the lawn of Bloomington Law School, a group of students gathered outside Lecture Hall 4. They weren't loud, but every eye held the same expression, curiosity and anticipation. No famous professor was scheduled to speak, and no grand keynote existed. But Thomas, the man once called nobody in a courtroom, had agreed to talk to the final year class in judicial oversight. He arrived with no entourage, no slides, just his familiar leather notebook and a pen. Inside the room, he stood before the students without a microphone. His voice was deep enough to be heard and slow enough for every word to settle into the air. "I'm not here to tell a story," he began. "I'm not here to be applauded. I'm only here to talk about what happens when a power system believes no one is listening." The room fell still. A female student raised her hand. "Sir, what made you choose judicial oversight? You're not a lawyer. You don't prosecute. You record. Weren't you ever tempted to intervene?" Thomas was quiet for a few seconds. Then he spoke, not looking at anyone, just as if remembering something to himself. "When I was 12, my cousin was sentenced to a year in jail for breaking a window. No one was hurt, no robbery, no property stolen. But the judge looked at the file, saw his skin color, and said, 'Just another statistic,' without asking what happened, without hearing a single word from my cousin." He paused, then continued, "I didn't study law to win court battles. I studied law to stand guard, because I believe people act differently when they know someone is watching." The room remained silent, not because it was a sad story, but because they all understood it was the most minor details, like that unwavering gaze that guard the line between justice and manipulation. A male student at the back asked in a low voice, "Do you think the judge meant it? Or was it just a moment of pressure, a slip?" Thomas neither nodded nor shook his head. His answer was short. "I don't care what she meant. I care what she said, and that she said it without hesitation. And that tells me everything I need to know." The session ended without applause, just a few silent nods, some thoughtful glances, and students leaving the room with slightly different eyes, more observant, more deliberate. Outside, Thomas stepped into the sunlight, looking up at the bare branches of a tree, still holding on to the last few dry leaves. A breeze passed through, carrying the soft tapping of shoes, a new generation beginning their steps into the field. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened, not because the right judge had been punished, but because a new generation would learn that silence does not equal surrender. He still carried Velena's handwritten note of thanks in his coat pocket. And on the back of that note, he quietly wrote down a new name for his watch list. Not to expose her, but to ensure someone was paying attention. In Rockford, courtroom 2B remained operational. A new judge stepped up. No press release, no new policies. Just one reminder shared on their first day. In this room, everyone gets to be heard, whether they wear suits, uniforms, or just an old coat. Beneath the robes behind the oak doors and inside every transcript, a shift had taken place. Not because someone would shout louder, but because someone had chosen to sit still, observe, take notes, and wait for the right moment to make the entire system listen. Justice doesn't always swing a gavel. Sometimes it just writes and waits.